The grand ballroom of the Choi Dynasty Hotel gleamed like a gilded cage. 300 elite guests raised crystal flutes toward the stage, where Choi Sung-ho stood with his hand pressed against the small of his pregnant mistress's back. "To new beginnings," he announced, his voice cold and absolute. Applause erupted. Camera flashes exploded. The mistress, young, radiant, victorious, smiled like a woman who had already won. Then the gilded doors opened. And she walked in. Sade Adebayo. His ex-wife. The woman he had destroyed. She moved through the crowd like smoke, calm, composed, dangerous. And when their eyes met across the room, Sung-ho's glass stem cracked beneath his grip. She knew something. Something that would burn his empire to ash. Sometimes, the truth doesn't scream. It waits. It watches. And when it finally speaks, everything falls. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe. Earlier that evening, the Choi Dynasty Hotel had been transformed into a temple of excess. 10,000 white roses cascaded from crystal chandeliers. Gold leaf covered every surface. A string quartet played softly in the corner while servers in black glided between clusters of Seoul's most powerful families. This was not merely a party. This was a declaration. Choi Sung-ho stood at the center of it all, his tailored black suit cutting sharp lines against the opulence surrounding him. At 39, he had inherited his father's empire and doubled it. Choi Industries controlled shipping, real estate, technology, and, through careful political maneuvering, half the country's infrastructure contracts. He was untouchable. He was feared. And tonight, he was announcing the future of his bloodline. "You look tense." The voice came from beside him, soft, honeyed, deliberately intimate. Park Min-ji tilted her face toward him, one manicured hand resting on the slight curve of her belly. At 26, she possessed the kind of beauty that photographed well, symmetrical features, porcelain skin, and eyes that calculated every advantage. "I'm never tense," Sung-ho replied without looking at her. "You've checked the entrance 4 times in the last 10 minutes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Security protocols." Min-ji's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind her eyes. After 8 months as his official companion, and 3 months carrying his heir, she had learned to read the silences between his words. She had also learned that some doors in his mind remained permanently locked. Doors with a woman's name carved into them. "The photographer wants another shot," she said smoothly, redirecting. "By the ice sculpture." Sung-ho finally turned to look at her. His gaze traveled over her designer gown, her professionally styled hair, the diamond necklace he'd purchased for this occasion. She was perfect. Polished. Controllable. Everything his ex-wife had refused to be. 5 minutes, he said. Then we make the announcement. Min-ji's fingers curled possessively around his arm as they walked toward the photographer. Neither of them noticed the woman watching from the shadows near the service entrance. 3 hours earlier, Sade Adebayo stood in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Gangnam, staring at an ivory envelope that had arrived without a return address. The paper was expensive. The calligraphy, flawless. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the announcement of Park Min-ji's pregnancy and her forthcoming union with Choi Sung-ho." Beneath the formal text, someone had written in red ink. He never knew the truth. Perhaps it's time he learned. Sade's hands didn't tremble. After everything she had survived, she had taught them stillness. She set the invitation on her kitchen counter and moved to the window, looking out at the Seoul skyline. The Choi Industries tower gleamed in the distance, a monument to the man who had once promised her forever. Forever had lasted exactly 2 years. 2 years of loving him in the shadows of his family's disapproval. 2 years of fighting for space in a world that saw her as an outsider, a Nigerian woman who had somehow captured the heir to Korea's most powerful dynasty. 2 years before he believed the lies. Before he let them destroy her. Sade closed her eyes, and the memories came unbidden. His hands in her hair. His voice in the darkness, "I will never let you go." Then later, his face carved from ice as he signed the divorce papers. "You were a mistake I should have corrected sooner." She opened her eyes. The skyline blurred, then sharpened. For 2 years after their divorce, Sade had rebuilt herself from nothing. She had returned to Nigeria briefly, then come back to Seoul, not for him, but because running felt like surrender. She had started a small translation business. Kept her head down. Stayed invisible. But invisibility, she had learned, was also a weapon. She picked up the invitation again, studying the red handwriting. Someone wanted her at that party. Someone who knew what she knew. The question was, why now? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The child isn't his. Proof will be at the celebration. Claim what was stolen from you. Sade stared at the message for a long moment. Then she walked to her closet and pulled out a dress she hadn't worn in 3 years. Black silk. Simple. Elegant. The dress she had been wearing the night Choi Sung-ho first told her he loved her. The party. 9:47 p.m. The ballroom hummed with power and pretense. Sung-ho moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations he didn't feel, shaking hands with men who feared him, smiling at women who wanted him. This was his world. This was his prison. Sung-ho. The voice cut through the noise, familiar, unwelcome. He turned to find his mother approaching, her silver hanbok immaculate, her expression carved from the same stone that had shaped his childhood. Madam Choi Yun-suk had never approved of his first marriage. She had made that clear every day of its existence. Mother. The announcement is in 15 minutes. Her eyes swept over the room, cataloguing guests, calculating alliances. I trust you've prepared appropriate remarks. I've run companies worth billions. I can manage a pregnancy announcement. You managed your last marriage directly into scandal. Her voice remained perfectly pleasant, perfectly poisonous. Forgive me for my concern. Sung-ho's expression didn't change. But something dark flickered in his gaze. That situation was handled. Was it? Yun-suk's eyes found Minute-ji across the room, watching her accept compliments with practiced grace. This one is more suitable, I admit. Better family. Better temperament. She understands her role. Unlike the other one. The words hung unspoken between them. I didn't ask for your approval then, Sung-ho said quietly. I don't need it now. No. You simply made the correct choice eventually. His mother's smile was thin. As you always do. She glided away, leaving him alone with the ghost of a woman she had helped him destroy. Across the room, Minute-ji watched the exchange between mother and son with sharp eyes. She had learned, in her months with Sung-ho, that Madam Choi was both an ally and a threat. The older woman had orchestrated the downfall of his first wife with surgical precision. Which meant she could do the same to anyone. You're staring. Minute-ji turned to find her assistant, a nervous young woman named Jiwon, hovering nearby. I'm observing. There's a difference. The photographer is ready for the next. In a moment. Minute-ji's hand drifted to her belly, a gesture she had perfected, equal parts maternal and possessive. Tell me, Jiwon. Do you believe in ghosts? What? Ghosts. Shadows of the past that refused to stay buried. Minute-ji's gaze returned to Sung-ho, watching him stand alone near the windows, his reflection fractured in the glass. I sometimes wonder if this palace is haunted. I don't understand. No. Minute-ji's smile returned, sharp and controlled. You wouldn't. She smoothed her gown and walked toward her future husband, each step calculated, each movement designed to project the image of a woman who had already won. She didn't notice the service door opening behind her. She didn't see the woman in black silk slip into the shadows. But Sung-ho did. Sung-ho felt her presence before he saw her. It was irrational. Impossible. The kind of mysticism he had spent his life rejecting. But the air in the room shifted. The string quartet seemed to fade. The champagne laughter dimmed. The 300 guests became ghosts themselves, irrelevant, invisible. And then he turned. And there she was. Sade. His Sade. She stood near the eastern wall, partially hidden by a cascade of white roses. The dress she wore was familiar, painfully, devastatingly familiar. Black silk that moved like water. A neckline that revealed the elegant column of her throat. Her locks were pulled back, exposing the face he had memoized in the early years of their marriage. The face he had tried to forget every day since. She had lost weight. The soft curves he remembered had sharpened into something more angular, more guarded. But her eyes, those dark, expressive eyes that could hold entire conversations without words. They were fixed directly on him. And they held no fear. Sung-ho's hand tightened around his champagne glass. The stem cracked. Golden liquid spilled over his fingers, and still, he didn't move. Couldn't move. Sung-ho. Minute Ji appeared at his side, her voice tight with barely concealed alarm. Your hand. It's fine. You're bleeding. He looked down. A thin line of red traced his palm where the crystal had cut him. He felt nothing. Get me a napkin, he said quietly. And find out how she got in. Who? But when Minute Ji followed his gaze, the space near the roses was empty. Sade had vanished. Sade moved through the service corridors like she belonged there. In another life, she had. She had walked these halls as the wife of Choi Sung-ho, the improbable bride who had captured the nation's most eligible bachelor. She had hosted galas in this very ballroom, smiled for cameras, learned to navigate the treacherous waters of Korean high society. She had also learned its secret passages. Turn left at the linen storage. Through the kitchen. Up the back stairs. The old pathways came back to her like muscle memory, guiding her through the gleaming machinery of the Choi Empire. She needed to find the proof. The message had said it would be at the celebration, but hadn't specified where. Someone was playing games, feeding her information in pieces, controlling her movements like a puppet. Sade didn't like being controlled. But she liked injustice less. She paused at a corner, listening. Voices echoed from somewhere nearby. Staff preparing for the announcement. The clink of glasses being arranged. The efficient bustle of an empire in motion. And beneath it, a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Told you to handle this. A woman's voice. Older. Authoritative. Sade pressed herself against the wall. Through a crack in a nearby door, she could see the edge of a silver hanbok. Madam Choi. The timeline is complicated, another voice. Younger. Desperate. The DNA results won't be ready until. I don't care about DNA results. I care about optics. Madam Choi's voice was ice. Tonight's announcement secures the family legacy. Whatever complications exist can be managed after the child is born. But if someone discovers, no one will discover anything. A pause. Unless you've been careless. I haven't. I swear. Good. Because you know what happened to the last woman who became a problem for this family. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then footsteps, expensive heels clicking against marble, moving away. Sade remained frozen against the wall, her heart pounding. The timeline. DNA results. Complications. The pieces began to arrange themselves in her mind, forming a picture that made her stomach turn. She had come here to expose a lie about a pregnancy. But this was something bigger. Something darker. And somehow, impossibly, it connected to her. 10:15 p.m. The ballroom had been arranged for spectacle. A small stage had been erected near the floor-to-ceiling windows, draped in white silk and illuminated by soft golden light. 300 guests had been carefully positioned, the most important families in front, media representatives along the sides, photographers crouched at strategic angles. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Sung-ho stood at the edge of the stage, his hand freshly bandaged, his expression carved from granite. Beside him, Minute Ji radiated careful triumph, her palm pressed protectively against her belly. Ladies and gentlemen. His voice carried without effort, commanding instant silence. Thank you for joining us this evening. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the official confirmation of rumors that had circulated for months. As you know, our families have a long history of partnership and mutual respect. He nodded toward Minute Ji's parents, seated in positions of honor. Tonight, I am pleased to make that partnership permanent. Applause began, but Sung-ho raised a hand. In 5 months, the Choi family will welcome its next generation. Park Minute Ji carries my heir. The applause exploded. Cameras flashed. Minute Ji's smile widened, her fingers curling around Sung-ho's arm in a display of possession that the photographers captured eagerly. This was her moment. Her victory. She had waited 8 months for this, 8 months of careful maneuvering, strategic vulnerability, and calculated intimacy. She had studied his weaknesses, learned his rhythms, made herself indispensable. And now, standing before Seoul's elite with his child in her belly. She had won. I would also like to announce, Sung-ho continued, our intention to formalize this union. The wedding will take place 3 months before the child's birth, ensuring. The doors opened. Not explosively. Not dramatically. Just, opened. And through them walked a ghost. Sade moved through the frozen crowd like smoke through still air. She didn't rush. Didn't falter. Each step was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of everything she had survived to reach this moment. The whispers began almost immediately. Is that? It can't be. The Nigerian woman? His ex-wife. I thought she left the country. Why is she here? Sade heard none of it. Her eyes were fixed on the stage. On him. Sung-ho had gone absolutely still. His hand remained raised from the interrupted announcement, frozen mid-gesture. The carefully constructed mask of the iron executive had developed a crack, tiny, almost invisible, but there. For 2 years, she had imagined this moment. What she would say. How she would feel. She had expected rage. Satisfaction. Vindication. Instead, she felt only a strange, hollow calm. The crowd parted before her, unable to do otherwise. She passed chairmen and socialites, politicians and industrialists, all of them rendered irrelevant by the weight of the moment. She stopped at the foot of the stage. 10 feet from the man who had promised her forever. 10 feet from the woman who had replaced her. Hello, Sung-ho. Her voice was quiet. Steady. The voice of a woman who had learned to carry her own weight. The ballroom held its breath. Minute G's hand tightened on Sung-ho's arm, her smile frozen. Who let this woman in? Security. No. Sung-ho's voice cut through like a blade. Not yet. He stepped forward, moving to the edge of the stage. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had once looked at her with something resembling love, traveled over her face like he was cataloging changes, searching for weaknesses. Sade. Her name in his mouth. It shouldn't have affected her. It did. I received an invitation, she said. I assumed my presence was expected. You weren't invited. Wasn't I? She reached into her small clutch and withdrew the ivory envelope, holding it up for him to see. Perhaps you should review your guest list more carefully. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sung-ho's jaw tightened. We should discuss this privately. Should we? Sade tilted her head, her gaze shifting briefly to Minute G, then back to him. I was under the impression that you preferred public announcements these days. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 witnesses. Dozens of cameras. The entire power structure of Korean high society watching as Choi Sung-ho's carefully constructed world began to show its cracks. And through it all, Sade Adebayo stood perfectly still. Calm. Composed. Dangerous. 20 minutes later. The private office on the hotel's executive floor had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline. Dark wood paneling absorbed sound and light. A massive desk dominated the center, positioned to ensure that anyone seated across from it would feel small. Sade sat in the leather chair facing that desk. She didn't feel small. Sung-ho stood by the windows, his back to her, his reflection fractured in the glass. He had removed his jacket, loosened his tie. The perfect image of the iron executive was crumbling at the edges. You had no right to come here. I had an invitation. Which you knew wasn't genuine. He turned, and the anger in his eyes was finally visible, hot, barely contained. What do you want, Sade? Money? Is that why you've stayed in Seoul? Waiting for an opportunity to? I don't want your money. Then what? He moved toward her, each step controlled despite the fury radiating from him. Revenge? Humiliation? You want me to suffer the way you supposedly suffered? Supposedly. The word hung between them like a blade. Sade rose slowly, meeting his approach with stillness. You divorced me, she said quietly. You called me in front of your lawyers and your mother and told me I was a mistake. You had me escorted from this very hotel by security while reporters photographed my humiliation. You erased me from your life like I had never existed. Because I what, Sung-ho? He stopped, inches from her. Close enough that she could see the faint scar on his jaw from a childhood accident. Close enough to smell the familiar cologne that she had once associated with safety. Close enough to see the uncertainty flickering behind his rage. "You know what you did," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "I know what you believe I did." Sade held his gaze, unflinching. "I also know that you never once asked me if it was true." The silence stretched between them. 3 years of pain. 3 years of questions never asked and answers never given. 3 years of a man who had convinced himself he was the victim. "It doesn't matter now," Sung-ho said finally, stepping back. "Whatever happened between us is finished. I have a new life. A new lie." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Sade moved past him, walking to the windows, letting the skyline fill her vision. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. "The child isn't yours, Sung-ho." The words landed like stones in still water. Behind her, she heard his breath catch. "That's impossible." "Is it?" She turned to face him. "Are you certain? Have you seen proof? Or have you simply believed what you were told, the same way you believed what they told you about me?" "They." His voice had gone cold again, but there was something new beneath it. Fear. "Who is they?" Before Sade could answer, the door burst open. Minute Ji stood in the doorway, her perfect composure finally shattered. "What is she saying to you?" Her voice was high, panicked. "Whatever she's telling you, it's lies. She's trying to destroy us, destroy everything we've." "Leave." Sung-ho's command silenced her. "Sung-ho, please." "I said leave." Minute Ji's eyes filled with tears, pretty, practiced tears that Sade recognized immediately. The same tears she had used when they'd first been introduced at a company gala, when Minute Ji had accidentally spilled wine on Sade's dress and apologized so prettily that Sung-ho had defended her. The same tears she had used when she told Sung-ho's mother that she'd seen Sade with another man. But that was a secret Sade would reveal in time. For now, she simply watched as Minute Ji retreated, slamming the door behind her. The echo faded. And once again, they were alone. "Explain." Sung-ho's voice was flat, controlled. But his hands, those hands that could sign billion-dollar contracts without trembling, were shaking. "Explain what, exactly?" Sade returned to her chair, sitting with the grace that had once captivated Seoul's high society. "Explain how I know the child isn't yours? Or explain why everyone in your life seems determined to keep you in the dark. Start with the pregnancy." "I can't prove it. Not yet." She watched his expression flicker, hope, then suspicion, then something harder. "But I can tell you what I overheard tonight. Your mother, speaking to someone about DNA results and timelines. About complications that need to be managed after the child is born. My mother discusses many things. With terrified staff members who ask what happens if someone discovers the truth." Sung-ho was silent. "I also received these." Sade pulled out her phone, showing him the mysterious text messages. "Someone wants this secret exposed. Someone who knows what really happened." He took the phone, scrolling through the messages, his expression darkening with each word. "This proves nothing. It's not meant to prove anything. It's meant to make you question." Sade leaned forward. "When is the last time you questioned anything your mother told you? When is the last time you demanded evidence instead of accepting her word as truth?" The question struck something deep. Sade could see it, the micro-expression that crossed his face, there and gone in an instant. Doubt. Buried deep, but present. "My mother protected this family." "Your mother protected her legacy." Sade's voice softened, and for a moment, something of the woman he had once loved bled through. "There's a difference, Sung-ho. I learned that the hard way." He set the phone down on the desk between them. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Not with anger. Not with suspicion. With something far more dangerous. Recognition. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "then why didn't you fight? 3 years ago, when everything fell apart. Why didn't you defend yourself?" The question was a knife, slipping between her ribs. Sade had asked herself the same thing 1,000 times. "Because I was pregnant." The words fell into silence. Sung-ho's face went white. What? I was 8 weeks pregnant when your mother presented her evidence against me. When you looked at me like I was filth beneath your shoes and told me to get out of your life. Sade's voice remained steady, but her hands had tightened in her lap. I lost the baby 2 weeks later. The stress, She stopped. Drew a breath. I didn't fight because I had nothing left to fight with. Sung-ho gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. You're lying. I've never lied to you. She met his eyes, and for the first time, let him see the depth of her pain. That's the difference between us. I told you the truth even when it hurt. You chose to believe the lies because they were easier. I didn't. You did. She rose again, moving toward the door. But I didn't come here to rehash the past. I came because someone wants the truth exposed, and I need to know why. What I found instead is a web of lies that goes deeper than I imagined. She paused at the door, turning back to face him. The child Minute carries may not be yours. Your mother is hiding something. And whatever happened 3 years ago, whatever drove us apart, I think it's all connected. Connected to what? Sade opened the door. That's what I intend to find out. And then she was gone. The ballroom had descended into chaos. Or rather, the carefully contained equivalent of chaos that Seoul's elite permitted themselves. Whispers rippled through clusters of guests. Phones appeared, capturing images and messages. The story was already spreading. The Iron executive's ex-wife had crashed his pregnancy announcement and disappeared into a private meeting. Minute stood near the champagne fountain, surrounded by sympathetic socialites who cooed appropriate comfort while secretly delighting in her public humiliation. She's clearly unstable, one woman murmured. Imagine showing up like that. Absolutely unhinged. The poor dear must be devastated. Minute accepted their hollow sympathy with gracious nods, her mind racing behind her tearful facade. What had Sade told him? How much did she know? And who had sent her that invitation? Someone had betrayed her. Someone with access to the truth she had so carefully buried. She needed to find out who. But first, damage control. Excuse me, she said softly, dabbing at her eyes. I need to find Sung-ho. Make sure he's all right. She moved through the crowd, her smile fixed, her heart pounding. Everything was falling apart. And she had no idea how to stop it. Meanwhile, Madame Choi Yun-suk watched the chaos from a private alcove, her expression unreadable. She had built this family's empire through strategic marriages and careful manipulation. She had removed obstacles, including her son's ill-advised first wife, with surgical precision. She had controlled every variable. Except this one. Find out how she got that invitation, she said quietly to the assistant hovering nearby. And find out what she knows. Yes, madam. If there's a leak in this family. Yun-suk's fingers tightened around her champagne glass. I want to know who's responsible. The assistant nodded and disappeared. Yun-suk returned her gaze to the ballroom, watching her son emerge from the elevator across the room. He looked different. Shaken. The mask of control had slipped. Dangerous. She had spent decades molding him into the perfect heir. Cold. Disciplined. Ruthless when necessary. But there had always been a weakness. A crack in his armor that no amount of training could seal. The Nigerian woman. Yun-suk had thought that problem was solved. Apparently, she had been wrong. 3 days later. Sade sat in her small apartment, surrounded by files and photographs. For 3 days, she had been piecing together a puzzle that spanned years, following threads, tracking timelines, connecting dots that had seemed random but now formed a disturbing pattern. It had started with the invitation. Anonymous. Untraceable. Designed to draw her back into the world she had escaped. Then the text messages. The child isn't his. Proof will be at the celebration. Claim what was stolen from you. But the proof hadn't been at the celebration. Instead, she had found something more valuable, a fragment of conversation that suggested the deception went deeper than she had imagined. DNA results. Timelines. Complications. Sade spread the photographs across her coffee table. Minute and Sung-ho at a charity gala, 6 months ago. Minute and an unidentified man at a cafe, 8 months ago. Minute G entering a medical clinic, 9 months ago, the same clinic where Sade had lost her own child. The pieces were there. But something was missing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You're getting closer. But you're looking in the wrong direction. Sade typed back immediately, then tell me where to look. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared again. Ask yourself, why would Madame Choi accept a grandchild that threatens her son's inheritance? Sade stared at the message. Inheritance. Of course. It wasn't about the baby. It was about control. If Minute G's child wasn't Sung-ho's, then Madame Choi would know. She would never accept an illegitimate heir into the family, unless she had leverage over Minute G. Unless the arrangement benefited her somehow. But what could possibly benefit Hyun-suk more than her own grandchild? Unless. Sade's blood ran cold. Unless the baby was meant to replace the one I lost. Choi Industries headquarters. 8:47 a.m. Sung-ho had not slept in 3 days. He stood at the window of his office, 40 floors above Seoul, watching the city wake beneath him. The same city his father had conquered. The same empire his mother had taught him to protect at any cost. I was pregnant. Sade's words echoed in his mind like a chaos. I lost the baby 2 weeks later. He had spent 3 days searching for proof that she was lying. He had found none. Instead, he had found hospital records, discreetly buried but still accessible to someone with his resources, showing that Sade Adebayo had been admitted to a private clinic 2 weeks after their divorce. Admitted for complications from a miscarriage. 8 weeks along. The timeline was exact. If she was telling the truth, if she had been pregnant when he threw her out, then he had. He couldn't finish the thought. Sir. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. What? Your mother is here. She says it's urgent. Sung-ho closed his eyes. Of course she was. Send her in. The door opened, and Madame Choi entered like a queen inspecting her kingdom. She wore pale blue today, soft colors that belied the iron beneath. You've been avoiding my calls. I've been busy. Too busy to discuss the spectacle your ex-wife created at your engagement party. Hyun-suk moved to the chair across from his desk, sitting without invitation. Too busy to reassure Minute G that her position is secure. Minute G's position is not my priority. Something flickered in his mother's eyes. Explain. Sung-ho turned from the window, finally facing her. When did you know Sade was pregnant? The silence that followed was answer enough. I don't know what that woman has been telling you. She told me that she was 8 weeks pregnant when I divorced her. That she lost the baby 2 weeks later. He moved toward the desk, his voice quiet and dangerous. I found hospital records that confirm it. So I will ask you again, Mother. When did you know? Hyun-suk's composure didn't crack. But neither did she answer. Whatever she's told you is designed to manipulate your emotions. She has always been. When did you know? The question was a blade. Hyun-suk looked at her son, really looked at him, and seemed to make a calculation. I suspected, she said finally. When she began to show signs of morning sickness. When she started declining wine at dinners. And you said nothing. I was gathering evidence of how affair. The pregnancy complicated matters. Complicated matters. Sung-ho's voice rose for the first time. She was carrying my child. She was carrying a child that may or may not have been yours. Hyun-suk remained perfectly calm. Given the evidence of her infidelity, paternity was far from certain. What evidence? Photographs. Witness statements. I showed you all of it. You showed me what you wanted me to see. Sung-ho gripped the edge of his desk. I'm beginning to wonder how much of it was real. For the first time, something like fear crossed Hyun-suk's features. I am your mother. Everything I have ever done has been to protect this family. Then prove it. He straightened, his expression hardening into the mask she had taught him to wear. Prove that the evidence against Sade was legitimate. Prove that the baby Minute G carries is mine. Prove that you haven't been manipulating me for years. Sung-ho. Get out. The command echoed in the silent office. Hyun-suk rose slowly, her dignity intact but her power, for the first time in decades, uncertain. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. That woman will destroy everything you've built. Perhaps. Sung-ho met her eyes. But at least the destruction will be honest. Sade's apartment. 9:32 p.m. She wasn't expecting him. But when she opened her door to find Choi Sung-ho standing in the narrow hallway of her modest building, she wasn't surprised either. Some patterns were inevitable. You found me. You didn't exactly hide. He stood perfectly still, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. May I come in? Sade considered refusing. Considered slamming the door in his face the way he had metaphorically slammed it in hers 3 years ago. Instead, she stepped aside. He entered her apartment like a man walking into a temple, carefully, reverently, aware that he didn't belong. His eyes traveled over the modest furniture, the books stacked on every surface, the photographs on her walls. Her life without him. Small. Simple. Real. You've been investigating. It wasn't a question. So have you, Sade replied, closing the door. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Sung-ho turned to face her. In the soft light of her apartment, he looked different. The sharp edges of the iron executive had softened into something more human. More vulnerable. More like the man she had fallen in love with, years ago. The hospital records were real, he said quietly. Sade nodded. The evidence my mother presented, the photographs, the testimony, I'm having it re-examined. You'll find inconsistencies. I've already found some. He moved toward her bookshelf, his fingers trailing over spines. The man in the photographs, the one you were supposedly having an affair with, he was your cousin. I tracked him down yesterday. Emeka. He was visiting from Lagos. Your mother had asked him to check on you because you hadn't been returning her calls. I was too nauseous from the pregnancy to talk to anyone. Sung-ho's hand stilled on a book. I know. The silence between them was different now. Not hostile. Heavy. I spent 3 years hating you, he said, still facing the bookshelf. Convincing myself that everything I felt had been a lie. That you had used me, deceived me, made a fool of me. I know. It was easier than the alternative. Sade moved closer, stopping a few feet behind him. What alternative? He turned. And for the first time since she had known him, Choi Sung-ho looked broken. That I destroyed the only real thing I ever had. The air between them crackled with 3 years of suppressed emotion. Sade watched him, this man who had been her husband, her lover, her greatest disappointment. She saw the cracks in his armor, the humanity bleeding through. She saw how easy it would be to forgive him. And how dangerous. The baby, she said, pulling back from the emotional edge. Minute G's baby. What have you found? Sung-ho's expression flickered, grateful for the deflection, perhaps, or disappointed. The timeline doesn't match. What do you mean? According to the doctors, she's approximately 6 months along. But if that's true, then conception would have occurred before we were. He paused. Before we were intimate. Sade absorbed this information. You weren't sleeping together when she claimed she got pregnant. No. He moved away from her, putting distance between them. I was still. Another pause. I wasn't interested in anyone. For a long time after the divorce. The admission hung in the air. For a long time after the divorce. Sade filed it away, refusing to let it soften her. So either she's lying about the dates, or the baby isn't mine. Which means someone else is the father. Sade began pacing, her mind racing. And your mother knows. She's covering for Minute G. Why? I don't know. What does Minute G have that Madame Choi wants badly enough to accept a false heir into the family? Sung-ho shook his head. I can't think of anything. Then we need to find out. Sade stopped pacing, facing him directly. Whoever sent me those messages wanted this exposed. They wanted me here, digging into this. Which means there's something to find. We. The question was quiet. Waited. Sade met his eyes. Don't misunderstand, she said carefully. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because someone manipulated me into coming back, and I want to know why. Our interests happen to align temporarily. Temporarily. Yes. Sung-ho nodded slowly, accepting her terms. But something in his gaze suggested he had different expectations for how this would end. 1 week later. The investigation consumed them both. Sung-ho used his corporate resources to dig into Minit-ji's past, financial records, medical histories, social connections. What he found painted a picture of a woman far more calculating than he had realized. Minit-ji had been pursuing him for years. Not months. Years. She had positioned herself in his orbit through careful networking, accepting lower positions at companies that did business with Choi Industries, attending the same charity events, cultivating relationships with his associates. She had been hunting him. And when Sade was removed from the picture, Minit-ji had moved in with precision. There's something else, his investigator reported during a late-night meeting. 6 months before she announced the pregnancy, Park Minit-ji was seen multiple times at a fertility clinic in Busan. The clinic has been cited for ethical violations, specifically, irregular documentation of donor protocols. Donor protocols. Sperm donors, sir. And surrogacy arrangements. Sung-ho felt sick. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. But if she was unable to conceive naturally, and she needed to secure her position quickly. The implication was clear. Minit-ji might have used a donor. And convinced him the child was his. Meanwhile, Sade was following her own threads. The mysterious messages had continued, fragments of information that led her deeper into the web of deception surrounding the Choi family. Check the date of your hospital admission. Check who authorized your records to be sealed. She had. And she had found something troubling. Her medical records, the ones documenting her miscarriage, had been ordered sealed by someone with significant legal influence. The authorization came from a law firm that regularly represented Choi Industries. Someone had wanted those records hidden. Someone who knew she had been pregnant and wanted to ensure that Sung-ho never found out. But there was something else. A secondary file, attached to her records. A request for biological samples, tissue from the pregnancy, to be preserved for potential legal proceedings. Sade stared at the document, her blood running cold. Someone had saved genetic material from her lost baby. Why? The confrontation came sooner than expected. Minit-ji had been growing increasingly desperate as Sung-ho's attention drifted away from her. He no longer touched her belly with affection. No longer discussed wedding plans. No longer looked at her with anything resembling warmth. He was slipping away. And she knew exactly who to blame. You need to stay away from him. Sade looked up from her coffee to find Minit-ji standing over her table at a small cafe near her apartment. The younger woman was dressed immaculately, her designer coat and leather gloves screaming wealth and status. But her eyes were wild. Sit down, Sade said calmly. You're causing a scene. Minit-ji sat, but her body remained rigid. I know what you're doing. You're trying to steal him back. Whispering lies about me, about the baby. I haven't whispered anything. Sade sipped her coffee. I've simply told him the truth. Something you should try sometime. The truth. Minit-ji laughed bitterly. What do you know about truth? You disappeared for 3 years. You let him believe you had betrayed him. If you really loved him. Love. Sade set down her cup, her gaze hardening. Let me tell you about love, Minit-ji. Love is standing by someone when the world is against you. Love is fighting for them even when it hurts. Love is not manipulating your way into someone's bed and faking a pregnancy to trap them. Minit-ji went pale. I don't know what you're. The fertility clinic in Busan. The irregular donor protocols. The timing that doesn't add up. Sade leaned forward. I know everything. The question is, what does Madame Choi have on you that's keeping you quiet? For a moment, Minit-ji looked like she might cry. Then her expression hardened. You think you're so clever, she hissed. You think you've figured it all out. But you don't know anything about what this family is capable of. What she's capable of. Then enlighten me. Minit-ji glanced around the cafe, lowering her voice. The baby isn't from a donor. The genetic material, it came from someone specific. Someone Madame Choi chose. Who? Minit-ji's eyes met hers. And for the first time, Sade saw real fear there. You. Sade's hands had stopped trembling by the time she reached her apartment. She had trained herself to process shock without visible reaction, a skill learned through years of navigating hostile environments. But internally, her mind was racing. The genetic material came from you. Minute G's words replayed on a loop. If it was true, if Madame Choi had somehow used the tissue from Sade's miscarriage to create the child Minute G now carried, it meant the baby was hers. Hers and Sung-ho's. Their lost child, resurrected through science and deception. Sade sank onto her couch, staring at nothing. How was this possible? The technology existed, she knew that much. Stem cells, genetic engineering, experimental procedures that pushed the boundaries of ethics and law. With enough money and the right connections, someone could theoretically grow a child from preserved tissue. But why? Why go to such extreme lengths? Her phone buzzed. The anonymous number again. You know now. The question is, what will you do with the truth? Sade typed back with shaking fingers. Why did she do this? What does she want? The response came immediately. Control. The same thing she's always wanted. A grandchild she can shape from birth, without the complications of a mother who defied her. She planned to remove Minute G after the birth, claim the baby as a Choi by blood, raise it herself. But she needed Minute G's womb. And she needed you gone. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Madame Choi had orchestrated everything. The fake evidence against Sade. The divorce. The sealed medical records. The pregnancy that would give her the heir she wanted. One with Choi blood, one she could control completely. She had stolen Sade's child. And she had almost gotten away with it. Sung-ho's penthouse. 11:47 p.m. He wasn't asleep when Sade arrived. He hadn't been able to sleep since the night she walked back into his life. She's not just carrying your child, Sade said without preamble, pushing past him into the apartment. She's carrying our child. Sung-ho stared at her. What? The baby. The genetic material came from tissue preserved after my miscarriage. Your mother took it, used it somehow, and implanted it in Minute G. Sade's voice cracked for the first time. The baby I lost, it's alive. It's growing. In another woman's body. The words hung in the air, impossible and undeniable. Sung-ho reached for the wall, steadying himself. That's not. It is. Sade thrust her phone at him, showing him the messages, the files she had gathered, the pieces of evidence that formed an unthinkable picture. Your mother played God with our child. And she was going to raise it without us ever knowing. Sung-ho read through the evidence in silence. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. Tears she had never seen before. I'll kill her. No. Sade grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. If you go after her now, she'll destroy everything. The evidence. The witnesses. She'll make it look like we're lying, like we're the villains. We have to be smarter. Smarter. His voice rose. She stole our child. I know. The scream tore from Sade's throat before she could stop it. 3 years of grief. 3 years of loss. All of it erupting in 2 words. Sung-ho went still. And then, slowly, carefully, he pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. She couldn't. For the first time since everything fell apart, Sade let herself be held by the man she had loved. The man she had lost. The man who had, unknowingly, lost everything alongside her. They stood in silence, grief binding them together more tightly than words ever could. And somewhere in the darkness of soul, a storm began to build. 3 days later. They had a plan. It had taken 72 hours of strategizing, investigating, and careful coordination, but they had a plan. The evidence against Madame Choi was damning, but circumstantial. They needed more. They needed confessions. They needed proof that would hold up in court and in the court of public opinion. They needed to destroy her completely. The board meeting is tomorrow, Sung-ho said, spreading documents across his desk. My mother will be presenting her quarterly report. Every major stakeholder will be present. Including the media. Not officially. But I can arrange for unofficial coverage. Sade nodded, studying the timeline they had constructed. Minute G is the weak link. She's terrified of your mother, but she's also terrified of being exposed. If we can get her to turn. She won't. She's too deep. Everyone has a breaking point. Sade met his eyes. We just need to find hers. Sung-ho was quiet for a moment. There's something else. Something I haven't told you. What? He pulled a file from his desk drawer and handed it to her. Inside were photographs, medical records, documentation of procedures performed at a private clinic. Minute G can't carry a pregnancy to term, he said quietly. She had complications years ago. Multiple miscarriages. She was told she could never have children. Sade looked up sharply. Then how? Experimental procedure. Gene therapy combined with hormone treatments. My mother funded it through a shell company. His jaw tightened. She's been planning this for years. Since before our divorce. The realization hit Sade like a physical blow. She was always going to take my child. Yes. Even if we had stayed together. She would have found another way. Sung-ho's voice was heavy with the weight of his family's sins. My mother doesn't accept failure. When she couldn't control you, she decided to eliminate you and take what she wanted anyway. Sade closed her eyes. 4 years, she had believed that the divorce was about her nationality, her background, her unsuitability for the Choi family. But it had never been about her. It had been about the child she carried. The heir Madame Choi was determined to claim. We end this tomorrow, Sade said, opening her eyes. All of it. Sung-ho nodded. Together. The night before the board meeting. Sade's apartment. 2:17 a.m. She couldn't sleep. The weight of everything that was about to happen pressed down on her like a physical force. Tomorrow, they would expose Madame Choi's crimes to the world. Tomorrow, they would fight for the child that had been stolen from them. Tomorrow, everything would change. A knock on her door shattered the silence. Sade reached for the small knife she kept in her nightstand, a habit from years of living alone, and moved silently to the entrance. It's me. Sung-ho's voice. She opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still dressed in his suit from earlier, but disheveled in a way she had never seen. His tie was loose. His hair was uncombed. His eyes were red-rimmed. I couldn't sleep, he said simply. Neither could I. She stepped aside, letting him in. They stood in her small living room, surrounded by the evidence they had gathered, the plans they had made, the weight of what was to come. I keep thinking about the baby, he said quietly. Our baby. Growing inside a stranger. Not knowing who it really belongs to. We'll get them back. What if we don't? He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression was devastating. What if my mother wins? She's beaten me before. She's beaten everyone who's ever stood against her. Sade moved closer. She's never faced us together. We were together before. It didn't matter. We were together, but we weren't united. She reached up, touching his face, the first voluntary contact between them in 3 years. We were fighting different battles. This time, we fight the same one. Sung-ho's hand came up to cover hers. I destroyed us, he whispered. I let her convince me that you were the enemy, and I destroyed the only thing that ever mattered. Yes. He flinched. But destruction isn't permanent, Sade continued. I've spent 3 years rebuilding myself from nothing. I know how to construct something beautiful from ruins. She met his eyes. The question is, are you willing to burn down the empire your mother built so we can build something better? The question hung between them. His answer came not in words, but in the way he pulled her closer. The way his lips found hers. The way 3 years of pain dissolved into a kiss that tasted like grief and hope and desperate second chances. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. I'm willing, he breathed against her skin. I'm willing to burn it all. Sade closed her eyes. Then let's set it on fire. The kiss deepened. Hands that had learned restraint found new courage. Sung-ho's fingers traced the line of her jaw, her neck, the bare skin of her shoulder where her robe had slipped. Sade felt herself dissolving, 3 years of walls crumbling under the weight of his touch. We shouldn't, she whispered, even as she pulled him closer. Not now. Not before. I know. But neither of them moved apart. The air between them crackled with tension, with want, with everything they had denied themselves since she walked back into his life. "Tomorrow," she said, finding the strength to step back. "After it's done. After we've won." Sung-ho's eyes burned into hers. "Promise me." "I promise." He nodded slowly, accepting the delay even as his body screamed against it. "Then I should go." "You should stay." She took his hand, leading him toward her bedroom. "Not for that. Just, stay. I don't want to be alone tonight." They lay together in her small bed, fully clothed, wrapped around each other like survivors of a shipwreck. And for the first time in 3 years, Sade slept without nightmares. Choi Industries headquarters. Boardroom. 10 a.m. The boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the Choi Industries tower. 40 executives sat around a massive table carved from a single piece of African blackwood, an irony that was not lost on Sade as she slipped into her position at the back of the room. She wasn't supposed to be here. But Sung-ho had arranged access through trusted allies, men and women on the board who had their own reasons to want Madame Choi's influence diminished. The presentation was already underway when she arrived. Madame Choi stood at the head of the table, her silver hanbok gleaming under the recessed lighting, her voice carrying the absolute authority of decades of power. "And as you can see from the quarterly projections, our expansion into Southeast Asian markets continues to exceed expectations. The Choi legacy remains secure." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. Cameras clicked. The unofficial media coverage was in place. Sade caught Sung-ho's eye from across the room. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Now, if I may." Sung-ho rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I have additional information to present to the board." Madame Choi's smile tightened. "This is not on the agenda." Nevertheless. He moved to the presentation screen, inserting a new drive. "The board deserves to know the full picture of our family's activities." The screen flickered. And then the images appeared. Documents. Medical records. Financial transactions traced through shell companies. Communications between Madame Choi and the fertility clinic. Evidence of the experimental procedures used on Minute G. And at the center of it all, proof that the child she carried had been created from genetic material stolen from Sade Adebayo. The room erupted. The board members' voices rose in shocked confusion. Madame Choi's face had gone white, her composure cracking for the first time in decades. Minute G, seated in a corner reserved for family, clutched her belly with trembling hands. But Sade watched none of them. Her eyes were fixed on Sung-ho. On the man who had just set fire to his mother's empire. On the father of the child they were about to reclaim. And in the chaos of the boardroom, with 40 years of Choi dynasty secrets spilling into the light, she saw him mouth 2 words across the room. "It's time." But what neither of them saw was Madame Choi's hand moving beneath the table, pressing a silent alarm that would summon security forces loyal only to her. Or the smile that crossed her face as she realized her son had underestimated her one final time. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The chaos in the boardroom lasted exactly 4 to 7 seconds. Then Madame Choi raised her hand. The room fell silent, not from respect, but from habit. Decades of conditioning had taught these executives that when Young-suk spoke, lesser voices ceased. "My son," she said, her voice carrying the resonance of absolute control, "has clearly been manipulated by his unstable ex-wife into making extraordinary accusations. I trust the board will consider the source before accepting this theatrical display." "The documents are authentic," Sung-ho cut in. "Financial records traced to your personal accounts. Medical files bearing your authorization. Communications in your handwriting. Documents can be fabricated." Young-suk's gaze swept the room, landing on each board member in turn. "Consider who benefits from destabilizing this company. Consider who walked away from this family with nothing and might want revenge." The implication was clear. All eyes turned to Sade. She stepped forward, moving into the light. "I didn't create these documents," she said, her voice steady. "But I did confirm them. Every hospital record. Every financial transaction. Every communication between Madame Choi and the clinic that performed illegal genetic procedures. And we should believe you because you can verify them yourselves." Sade pulled a flash drive from her pocket. Copies for every board member. Original documents held in secure locations. And testimony from 3 clinic employees who are prepared to speak on record. Murmurs erupted again. Yun-suk's composure flickered, barely, but visibly. This is ridiculous. Security will not be interfering. Chairman Park, the oldest member of the board, rose from his seat. His voice carried the weight of 70 years and the influence of Korea's most respected legal family. I have reviewed the preliminary evidence. It is substantial. Jeon-woo. Yun-suk's voice held a warning. We have been allies for 40 years. And for 40 years, I have looked the other way while you consolidated power through methods I found distasteful but not illegal. His eyes hardened. This crosses a line. Genetic manipulation. Medical fraud. The theft of biological material from a woman who was still legally your daughter-in-law. The child in question will still be a Choi. The child in question was stolen. Sade's voice rose, commanding the room. Not from a lab. Not from a procedure. From me. From my body. From the pregnancy I lost because your campaign of psychological torture destroyed my health. The silence that followed was devastating. Sade felt the weight of 40 pairs of eyes on her. She didn't waver. I was 8 weeks pregnant when Madam Choi presented false evidence to Sung-ho and demanded he divorce me. I lost that baby 2 weeks later, alone, in a hospital where no one from this family came to see me. And while I was grieving, while I was broken, she was already planning to harvest what remained of my child. Minute G made a sound, a small, strangled sob. Everyone turned. She sat in her corner, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against the curve of her belly. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, I didn't know where it came from. She told me it was from a donor. Someone anonymous. I never would have. Silence. Yun-suk's voice cracked like a whip. But the damage was done. Minute G's confession, incomplete as it was, had confirmed the essential truth. The child she carried was not from an anonymous donor. The child was Sade's. And everyone in the room now knew it. 20 minutes later. The board had voted to suspend Madam Choi's position pending a formal investigation. It wasn't a conviction, not yet, but it was something unprecedented in the history of Choi Industries. The woman who had controlled the company from the shadows for 4 decades was now, officially, under scrutiny. Sung-ho found Sade in a private office adjacent to the boardroom. She was standing at the window, looking out at the city she had fled from and returned to. It's not over, she said without turning. I know. He moved to stand beside her. But it started. Your mother won't go quietly. No. She'll fight with everything she has. He paused. Which is considerable. Sade finally turned to face him. In the harsh light of the office, she looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. The strain of the past weeks was written in the tension of her shoulders, the set of her jaw. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Fire. The baby, she said. We need to talk about the baby. I know. Minute G is 6 months along. The child is biologically ours, yours and mine. Created without our consent, gestated in another woman's body. Her voice wavered slightly. What happens when it's born? Sung-ho was quiet for a long moment. Legally, Minute G is the mother. She carried the pregnancy. She'll have rights. Rights to a child that was never supposed to exist. A child created through illegal medical procedures, using genetic material stolen from my body. The law is complicated. The law is wrong. Sade's composure cracked. That's my child, Sung-ho. Our child. The one I mourned for 3 years. The one I thought I had lost forever. And now it's alive, and I might not have any claim to it. Her voice broke on the last words. Sung-ho reached for her. This time, she let him hold her. I won't let that happen, he said into her hair. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what my mother does. That child is ours, and we will get them back. How? I don't know yet. He pulled back to look at her. But I didn't burn down my family's empire just to lose everything anyway. We'll find a way. Sade searched his eyes. She saw the man who had hurt her. The man who had believed lies about her. The man who had let his mother destroy their marriage. But she also saw something new. Determination. Regret. And something that might, possibly, be love. Okay, she said quietly. Together, then. Together. Madame Choi's private residence. 3:47 p.m. Yun-suk sat in her study, surrounded by the trappings of a lifetime of power. Priceless art on the walls. First editions in floor-to-ceiling bookcases. A desk that had belonged to a Joseon-era king. All of it meaningless now. Her son had betrayed her. The board had turned on her. And the woman she had worked so hard to destroy was standing at the gates, ready to claim everything. The damage is contained for now, said the man across from her. Lee Jung-hoon, her personal attorney, had served the Choi family for 30 years. The investigation will take months. Plenty of time to manage the evidence. Evidence can be managed. Witnesses can be persuaded. Yun-suk's voice was cold. But my son cannot be controlled. He's made that abundantly clear. If I may. Jung-hoon hesitated. Perhaps a different approach is warranted. Speak. The Nigerian woman, Sade Adebayo, remains your primary threat. Without her, your son would have nothing. No evidence. No testimony. No reason to continue this crusade. She's been surprisingly resilient. Everyone has weaknesses. Jung-hoon pulled a file from his briefcase. Her family in Lagos. Her business clients in Seoul. Her health. Yun-suk raised an eyebrow. She had a difficult recovery after the miscarriage. There were complications. Jung-hoon's voice was carefully neutral. Complications that could, theoretically, recur under sufficient stress. You're suggesting we threaten her health. I'm suggesting we make her understand that this fight has cost she may not be willing to pay. Yun-suk considered this. 4 decades, she had protected the Choi legacy through strategic manipulation, careful alliances, and the occasional application of pressure. She had never crossed certain lines, not because of morality, but because such measures were rarely necessary. But these were not ordinary circumstances. Make the arrangements, she said finally. But carefully. I want no traces. Of course, madam. As Jung-hoon left, Yun-suk turned to the window. The Seoul skyline glittered in the afternoon light. Somewhere out there, her son was planning her downfall alongside the woman who had destroyed her family's carefully constructed future. They thought they had won. They had no idea what she was willing to do. 5 days later. The first sign came in the form of a letter. Sade found it slipped under her apartment door. An elegant envelope containing photographs of her mother at a market in Lagos, her younger brother at his university campus, her business partner meeting with clients. No message. Just images. A reminder that she had people who could be hurt. She's trying to intimidate you, Sung-ho said when Sade showed him the photographs that evening. It's what she does when she's losing. It's working. Sade's voice was tight. My family is in danger because of me. I can arrange protection. For how long? Your mother's reach extends across continents. She has resources I can't even imagine. Sade dropped the photographs on the table between them. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed invisible. And let her get away with everything. Sung-ho moved around the table, taking her hands in his. You're the only person who has ever stood up to her and survived. That's not weakness, that's strength. Strength won't protect my mother from a car accident. It won't protect my brother from a mugging gone wrong. Then we end this faster. His grip tightened. We accelerate the investigation. Get the evidence to prosecutors before she can destroy it. Make her arrest a matter of days, not months. How? I still have allies on the board. People who have waited decades for a chance to break her hold on the company. If we can coordinate with them. She'll see it coming. Maybe. Sung-ho's expression hardened. But she's made a mistake. She's so focused on you that she's forgotten something important. What? She's not the only one in this family who knows how to play ruthless games. The following week, Sung-ho reached out to his network, Not the business contacts cultivated under his mother's watchful eye, but the relationships he had built independently. Men and women who owed him favors. Executives who had been sidelined by Hyun-suk's machinations. Journalists who had been waiting for permission to publish stories they'd been sitting on for years. The response was overwhelming. "Your mother has made enemies in every sector," said Park Jae-won, a media mogul who had lost a broadcasting license to Hyun-suk's interference a decade ago. "Half of Seoul has been waiting for someone to take her down. And the other half? Afraid to move first." Jae-won smiled grimly. "But now that you've started this, they're lining up to join." The coalition formed rapidly. Board members who publicly supported the investigation. Journalists who began publishing carefully documented exposés of Hyun-suk's business practices. Former employees who came forward with testimony about irregularities they had witnessed but been too afraid to report. The Choi empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts. But Hyun-suk wasn't finished. Minute G's apartment. 11:32 p.m. She had been placed under discreet surveillance. For her own protection, she was told, though she understood the real reason. They didn't trust her. And she couldn't blame them. A knock at her door made her jump. "Ms. Park." The guard's voice was professional. "You have a visitor." "At this hour?" "She says it's urgent. She says you'll want to hear what she has to say." Minute G hesitated, then nodded. The door opened to reveal Madame Choi. She looked different than Minute G had ever seen her, tired, somehow smaller, the armor of authority stripped away. But her eyes were still sharp. "May I come in?" Minute G stepped aside, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. Hyun-suk entered and surveyed the apartment with barely concealed distaste. "They've moved you somewhere modest." "They're protecting me." "From me." A thin smile. "How thoughtful." "What do you want?" Hyun-suk turned to face her, and for a moment, something almost like humanity flickered in her expression. "I want to offer you a choice," she said. "The child you're carrying, do you understand what it represents? It's not mine. Biologically, no. But legally, you are the mother. The woman who carried it, nurtured it, will give birth to it." Hyun-suk stepped closer. "The Choi fortune is considerable. With the right arrangement, you could ensure that child inherits everything. Including your security." "In exchange for what?" "Testimony. Against my son and his ex-wife. Evidence that they manipulated you, coerced you, threatened you into complying with their version of events." Minute G stared at her. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to survive." Hyun-suk's voice hardened. "Because make no mistake, if my son wins this battle, you will have nothing. The child will be taken from you. You'll face criminal charges for your involvement in the procedure. And you will spend the rest of your life regretting the moment you trusted my offer of a better future. And if I help you, then I protect you. The child remains in your care. You receive a generous settlement. And you disappear, somewhere comfortable, somewhere safe, somewhere far from this family's problems." Minute G was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved to the door and opened it. "Get out. You're making a mistake." "I've made many mistakes. Trusting you was the worst." Minute G's voice was steady for the first time in weeks. "I didn't know where the genetic material came from. But I know now. And I won't help you steal a child from its real parents." Hyun-suk's expression flickered, rage, quickly suppressed. "You'll regret this." "Maybe." Minute G met her gaze. "But at least I'll be able to live with myself." 2 weeks later. The investigation had accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. Prosecutors, emboldened by the evidence and the growing coalition against Hyun-suk, had begun formal proceedings. Bank accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. The carefully constructed financial architecture of 4 decades of manipulation was being dismantled piece by piece. And then the arrest warrant was issued. Sung-ho received the call at 6:47 a.m. "They're moving on her today," said his contact in the prosecutor's office. "Armed officers. Multiple charges. She'll be in custody by noon." He hung up and turned to Sade, who was already awake beside him. They had been spending nights together, not physically intimate, not yet, but wrapped around each other in the darkness, two survivors clinging to whatever warmth they could find. It's happening. In a few hours. Sade sat up slowly. I should feel victorious, she said. I should feel something. What do you feel? She was quiet for a moment. Exhausted. Sad. Relieved. She looked at him. And terrified. Of what? Of what comes next? The baby. Us. Everything that's been broken, can it really be put back together? Sung-ho reached for her hand. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I want to try. If you'll let me. Sade's fingers intertwined with his. I haven't forgiven you, she said quietly. I may never fully forgive you. What you did, what you let happen. I know. But I want to try too. She turned to face him fully. Not because of the baby. Not because of revenge or victory or any of this. Because somewhere underneath all the pain, I still. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Sung-ho leaned forward and kissed her, gently, reverently, like a prayer. Then we try, he said against her lips. Together. Together. Madam Choi's residence. 11:47 a.m. The officers arrived in unmarked vehicles, 12 of them, moving with quiet efficiency through the gates of the estate. Yun-suk watched them approach from her study window. She had known this was coming. Her sources in the prosecutor's office had warned her 2 days ago. She could have fled, she had the resources, the connections, the ability to disappear into any country that would accept her money. But running felt like surrender. And Choi Yun-suk had never surrendered in her life. Madam. Her butler appeared in the doorway. The officers are requesting entry. Let them in. She straightened her hanbok, checked her reflection in the mirror, and walked to meet her fate with the same composure she had maintained through every crisis of her long career. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no patience for social hierarchy, read the charges clearly. Choi Yun-suk, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit medical fraud, unlawful procurement of biological materials, and multiple violations of genetic manipulation regulations. You have the right to remain silent. The words washed over her like distant thunder. Around her, officers began cataloging evidence, documents, electronics, physical files that would be used to construct her destruction. As they led her toward the waiting vehicle, Yun-suk caught sight of movement at the edge of the estate grounds. Her son's car. He had come to watch. Their eyes met across the distance. She expected to see triumph in his gaze. Satisfaction. The vindictive pleasure of a child who had finally escaped his parents' shadow. Instead, she saw sadness. And that hurt more than any arrest ever could. 3 days later. The news of Madam Choi's arrest dominated every media outlet in Korea. Headlines screamed variations of the same story. Choi dynasty matriarch faces charges for genetic manipulation scandal. Stolen child at center of corporate power struggle. Iron executive's mother arrested in elaborate scheme. The coverage was relentless, brutal, and deeply satisfying to those who had suffered under Yun-suk's machinations for decades. But for Sade, the media circus was secondary to a more immediate concern. Minute-ji had gone into premature labor. The stress of the past weeks, the emotional toll of her testimony against Madam Choi, the physical demands of a high-risk pregnancy on a body that had never been designed to carry a child, it had all combined into a medical emergency. Sade stood in the hospital corridor, watching doctors rush past, feeling utterly helpless. She's stable for now. Sung-ho appeared beside her, his phone still in hand. But they're preparing for an emergency delivery. The baby is coming tonight. Tonight. Sade's voice was barely a whisper. It's too early. 6.5 months. The doctors say there's a good chance. A chance. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. Our child's life is a chance. A probability. A statistic. Sade. I know. I know we can't control this. I know we've done everything possible. She pressed her palms against her eyes. But I've already lost this baby once. I can't. Her voice broke. Sung-ho pulled her against his chest, holding her as she finally let herself crack. 3 years of grief. 3 years of loss. All of it converging on this single moment. Whatever happens, he said into her hair, we face it together. You and me. No matter what. She nodded against his shoulder. Together. Seoul National University Hospital. 9:47 p.m. The delivery took 4 hours. Minute G, despite everything, despite being a pawn in someone else's scheme, despite carrying a child that was never supposed to be hers, fought with everything she had to bring the baby safely into the world. At 1:23 a.m., a cry filled the operating room. Small. Fragile. But alive. The medical team moved with practiced efficiency, transferring the premature infant to the NICU, initiating the protocols that would give the tiny body the best chance at survival. Sade and Sung-ho waited outside, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles were white. When the doctor finally emerged, they both rose. She delivered successfully, the doctor said. A girl. 2 pounds, 3 ounces. Small, but she's breathing on her own and her vitals are stable. A girl. Their daughter. Can we see her? Sade's voice trembled. The doctor hesitated. There are legal complications. The birth mother has already signed documentation waiving parental rights. Sung-ho's voice was firm. Ms. Park made her decision clear before the delivery. She wants nothing more to do with this situation. Even so, the genetic circumstances are unprecedented. Our legal team. Your legal team can speak to mine. Sung-ho stepped forward, using every inch of his corporate authority. Right now, I am asking to see my daughter. Do you intend to prevent that? The doctor looked between them, the powerful CEO and the woman who had survived everything his family had thrown at her. Follow me. The NICU was quiet except for the soft beeps of monitoring equipment. The baby lay in an incubator, impossibly small, surrounded by tubes and wires and the desperate machinery of modern medicine. Sade pressed her hand against the clear plastic, tears streaming down her face. She's beautiful, she whispered. Sung-ho stood beside her, equally transfixed. She has your chin, he said softly. And my mother's stubbornness, apparently. The doctors said she shouldn't be breathing this well at her gestational age. She's fighting. Like her mother. Sade turned to look at him. In the soft light of the NICU, surrounded by the proof of everything they had lost and found again, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the beginning of it. What do we name her? She asked. Sung-ho was quiet for a moment. In my family, the grandmother traditionally chooses the name. But. He paused. That tradition dies with my mother's arrest. Good. I was thinking. He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. There's a name in both Korean and Yoruba culture. It means precious in Korean and God has answered in Yoruba. What name? Yejin. Sade tested it on her tongue. Yejin. Yejin, she repeated. Precious. God has answered. She looked at the tiny fighter in the incubator. Hello, Yejin, she whispered. I'm your mother. And I've been waiting a very long time to meet you. 6 weeks later. Yejin had defied every statistical expectation. She had gained weight steadily. Her lungs had developed faster than anyone predicted. Her heart, her brain, her tiny perfect fingers and toes, all of it had grown and strengthened with a determination that her parents recognized immediately. She was a fighter. Like both of them. The day they finally brought her home, Sade stood in the nursery Sung-ho had prepared, a room that had been decorated and redecorated 3 times because nothing seemed perfect enough, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace.